Hello, our objective today is that you will solve equations using inverse operations. Now obviously you've done that a lot. Today in particular it's going to be about inverse exponents. And I'm going to start with the notes that are on the page. So an inverse operation you've known since you were in like second grade. The opposite of addition is subtraction, and what that looks like in algebra is this. A plus n on the left side of the equation becomes a minus n on the right side. So if y plus n equals x, then y is equal to x minus n. In order to move it from one side of the equation to the other, it becomes its inverse operation. So same thing here. If you have n times y is equal to x, then y is equal to, sorry, I'm going to do this in the same color. Y is equal to x divided by n, because that's the opposite of multiply. You guys know from last unit the inverse of sine is inverse sine. So if sine of y equals x, then that means y is equal to inverse sine of x. So just the same, like y is the same, x is the same, but the sign is moved to the other side and become the inverse. And then here's the new one. So this is what we're learning today. If you have a power that you want to get rid of, you get rid of it using its inverse power. Another way to say that is its reciprocal power. So y to the n equals x. That means y is equal to x to the power of 1 over n. That's the reciprocal of n. This now allows us to solve a lot more equations other than things just that have squares and square roots. So for example, if x to the 8th is equal to a, then x is equal to a to the 1/8. And then if x to the 7th is equal to a, then x is equal to a to the 1/7. It's always the reciprocal. One more thing about this, just as a reminder, if you have a number to the 8th, so like 2 to the 8th, if you do this on your calculator, is 64. Negative 2 to the 8th is also 64, because negative numbers to even powers all end up canceling out. So when you go backwards like this, 1/8 is the opposite of 8. You don't know if this had been positive or negative. We talked about this when we talked about square roots at the beginning of the year. So that means whenever you have an exponent with an even denominator, you have to put a plus or minus in front of it. So put a little note for that. Even denominator in your exponent means you have a plus minus. So why does one of these has a plus minus and the other does not? It's because of this. The first one has an even denominator. The last thing we're going to talk about, as I finish writing, is square root. Now, you first learned that something squared is the inverse of a square root, and that's fine. But now we can think of this another way too. Something squared, its inverse is the reciprocal power, so that would be to the power of 1/2. Now that means that square root is the same thing as power of 1/2. Sorry for my terrible circle. I'm just going to undo that. But these are the same thing. So another way to write square root is power of 1/2. And this is important. You'll see it like this more often starting right now. And if you're like me, you might agree that this is just a little bit nicer. A 2 and a 1/2 look like the opposites of each other, whereas a 2 and like this little check mark symbol, like people wouldn't know that as obviously as this one. So in the future, this is going to be used more, and this will be used less, but it'll never totally disappear. Now that being said, let's get to the actual problems. This video is already getting a little long. We are going to solve using inverse operations. You're going to need a calculator with you, and I'm going to round everything to 2 decimal spots. Everything else about this is going to be the same. So as I write, if I write it in blue, that's an optional thing that you need to write at this point. So like for A, we're going to start by dividing by 8. You don't need to write divided by 8 unless you really want to. Obviously, you can if you want. That leaves us with z to the 3/2 is equal to 100. And then the last thing we're going to do is the inverse operation. So that's going to become 2/3 on this side. That's the reciprocal of this. So z is equal to 100 to the 2/3. And if you actually type that into the calculator, which I'm going to do right now, 100 to the power of 2/3 is 4.64. And that is it. We've solved for z. We did not need a plus minus in this problem because the denominator was odd. Next problem, we're going to start by subtracting 5. That should not be a surprise. Again, if I write it in blue, that's optional for you to write. This gives us 2a plus 1 to the 1/5 is equal to -3. And now we need to get rid of the 1/5. We have to get rid of things outside the parentheses before inside always. So that 1/5 on this side becomes a 5th on the other side, and I'll put it in outside of parentheses. So 2a plus 1 is equal to -3 to the 5th. And again, I'm grabbing my calculator to do that. And that's -243. And the rest of it, we're just now in an algebra 1 equation. So I subtract 1 on both sides. This gives me 2a is equal to -244. And then divide both sides by 2, which gives us a is equal to -122. If you want to check your answer, of course, you can plug it back into the equation and it will work. We did not need plus or minus here because the denominator of our exponent was odd. This is like 5/1. Last one. First thing we need to do is get rid of this 3. You always get rid of it by dividing. Sometimes people accidentally try to distribute, but you just can't ever do that if there's an exponent. So we divide. This gives us x plus 1 to the 4th is equal to 7. And now we're going to get rid of that 4 by making it a power of 1/4 on the other side. Now you notice we've got an even denominator, so we're going to have a plus minus. This gives us x plus 1 is equal to plus or minus 7 to the 1/4. And again, I'm typing this in. And it comes out to 1.63. So this is plus or minus 1.63. Now I don't really care how you write the next steps as long as you get the right answer. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to think of it like this. We've got two ways to do it at this point. X plus 1 is equal to 1.63, and x plus 1 is equal to -1.63. Again, you can do this different ways. I don't really care, as long as you get the 2 answers we're about to get. In the first one, if you subtract 1 on both sides, you get 0.63. And in the second one, if you subtract 1 on both sides, you get -2.63. So if you have an even denominator, you're going to get 2 answers. Sometimes you'll have plus or minus at the end. Sometimes you'll have an additional step like this. So that is it. We have solved equations using inverse operations, specifically inverse exponents.